Hey, it's Liz from No Trace. In this video, I'm going to show you how to sew a zero waste shirt. This is the parasol top by Cris Wood. You can get the pattern at Cris Wood Sews. And I have another video that shows you how to make the parasol dress, also by Cris Wood. So I'm going to link to that right here. And let's go.
I printed out one of the pages from the parasol top pattern and took measurements and started filling in the blanks. I have another video that walks you through how to take the measurements and the math that goes into the pattern. So if you want more help on this part, check out my other parasol dress video. After doing all that math, I saw that I needed about 43 inches of fabric. So I went ahead and cut that. And my fabric needed some ironing, so I went ahead and ironed it. Once my fabric is ironed, I folded it neatly, lining up those selvage edges, and then I started cutting out the different parts of the parasol top, following the pattern that I printed out and that I was looking at on my computer at the same time. Here I'm cutting out the bodice panels from one of the big cuts that I already did from my fabric. Sometimes I find it helpful to fold a piece to a smaller height and then do the cut, which is what I'm doing here. I think I actually cut my bodice panels a little bit too wide, so I'll probably go back and fix this shirt at some point. I didn't realize it till I was all done with the project. But here I'm also cutting out the ties and the facings for the parasol top. The first thing that I sewed was the ties. And so I just folded one of the 2-inch strips of fabric with the right sides together and stitched with a 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way down. Once both of the ties are sewn, I trimmed the extra fabric along the seam allowance so that it was a bit shorter and easier to turn these around in the next step. I clipped a safety pin to one end of the tie and then pushed it into the tube and just sort of massaged it all the way down. It does take a little while. This part is so satisfying. And I went ahead and repeated those 2 steps with the other tie that was the wrong side out. I ironed each of the ties so that they would lay nice and flat for the next steps. I also tied a knot on one end of each of my 2 ties. Once the ties were ready to go, I grabbed my bodice panels and folded them in half lengthwise to find the center, and I put a pin to mark that center on both of the 2 bodice panels. Once I had the center marked on both of my bodice panels, I went ahead and pinned the ties, one to each of the bodice panels. Then I got the facings, the other 2-inch strips of fabric, and laid those with the right sides together on top of the tie and the bodice panels. Go ahead and sew these pieces together with a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance and make sure to backstitch at the beginning and the end. After you've sewn up both sides of the bodice panels, you want to press the seam allowance towards the facing with your iron. After you press the seams, line up the bodice panels with the right sides together and line up the seams along the facings. Go ahead and pin them together at the bottom edges and then mark 3 inches from the bottom edge on each end of the bodice panel. At the machine, sew from the bottom edge right alongside the original seam up to your 3-inch mark, and make sure to do a back stitch at the beginning and the end on this short little seam. After you've joined the bodice panels, you're going to press the facing with the wrong sides together on both sides of your bodice panels, and then you're going to fold the facing raw edge under and press along both sides of the bodice panel again. Next, you'll edge stitch along both of these folded edges on the facing. Fold your bodice panels with the right sides together so that the bottom edges are touching, and line up the sides really nicely with each other and pin them together. And then you want to mark 3 inches from the bottom edge up on both sides of the bodice that you've made. Stitch along this little 3-inch segment on each side of your bodice using a 1-inch seam allowance. At the iron, you're going to want to fold over the sides of the bodice 1 inch and press it all the way around on both of the sleeves or the side edges of your shirt. And then you want to fold it over again so that just like you did the center seam, you'll have a nice finished edge on the sides of your shirt. Go ahead and edge stitch along these the nice folded edges that you just created on both of the sleeves. Take a moment and zigzag or serge along the raw bottom edge of the bodice. Now get your 2 long pieces of fabric that are going to be the sort of flowy part of your top and lay them with the right sides together, making sure to line up the edges and pin them along the sides. Sew the sides on the bottom panel together with a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, and then go ahead and zigzag stitch all the way around this top edge of the bottom part. Now put your machine on the longest stitch length that you have and a low tension and sew a row of stitches 1/4 inch away from that top edge on the bottom part of your shirt that you just did a zigzag stitch for. Sew another row of really long, really loose stitches 1/4 inch below that row that you just finished. Pull on the loose threads to gather up the bottom part of the top until it is the same size as the opening of the first part of the top that you created. After I got the bottom part of the shirt to be the same size as the top part, I put it into the top part of the parasol top. And so I was lining up the zigzagged edges and I was lining up the side seams, and then I pinned along the sides and in a few other spots too. At the machine, I stitched the 2 parts of the parasol top together, following just below the lowest gathering stitch line that I had created. I took a quick moment to trim all those loose threads on the inside of the top. To hem the bottom edge, I folded it up about a 1/2 inch and pressed it, and then I folded it another 1/2 inch and pressed it, and then I just sewed all along that folded edge. I definitely like this design, even though I messed up and I do need to take the shirt in, but here's what it looks like.
If you made it this far, go ahead and give this video a thumbs up. Also, we have a free Facebook group that's all about zero waste sewing and crafting. I'd love to see you in there. The link to join is in the description box below this video, so just click on down in there and check it out.